Hello, Dog Nation. Happy Friday to all of you. Welcome into Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews, where we make our picks for the games of the weekend. And boy, it gets interesting this time of year with Georgia riding high at number one in the college football playoff rankings and other teams vying for a spot in those same college football playoff games coming up. Lots of interesting action and lots of opinions to be had on all these games from a gambling perspective, and we'll look forward to sharing all of those with you. If you've never joined us before, here's how our game works. In just a moment, the entire Dog Nation team, myself, Mike Griffith, Connor Riley, Jeff Sintel, we'll all make our picks on big games for the weekend against the spread. Dog Nation Daily listeners and viewers, they'll be invited to weigh in there as well. And after that, a consensus is formed. And we'll ask Dari Payro at that point from R.S. Andrews if he wants to, as we say, go with the flow and join that consensus, or if Dari wants to go against the grain on all of that. We've had a lot of fun doing this for a number of years and obviously having a great time with all of that this year here as well. Some of us more fun than others, I guess. With that in mind, before we make this week's picks, let's go to our tote board here and give you an idea of the standings, because we do write all this stuff down. We keep track, we keep records here. And by the way, speaking of Dari Payro of R.S. Andrews on top last week, we all had the push, obviously, on the Arkansas LSU game. But beyond that, Dari 2-2 last week puts him at 29-23 on the year. Connor Riley comes back strong with a 3-1 week that allows him to surpass me. He is now 27-25 on the campaign. After a pretty bad week last week, I am now right there in the middle, 26-26 on the year, just ahead of Mike Griffith, who after a 500 week last week is 25-27 on the season, and Jeff Sintel down at the bottom at 24-28 on the year. But how about a red-hot 3-1 week last week? So that's the story for us leading into this week, and we'll have a lot of thoughts to give you on the big games here coming up. Before that, though, let me remind you that all of this is brought to you by our friends at R.S. Andrews. And as good as Dari Payro is at picking games, and you see evidence of that, he and the team there at R.S. Andrews, even better when it comes to taking care of you for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. And right now, certainly that heating system is probably something you're thinking an awful lot about, because it has been very, very cold here as of late. A reminder that the winter is on its way, and go ahead and get that heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs to get you ready for the winter that'll be here before you know it, and it's kind of really already here right now. So find out more about that online at rsandrews.com. So that's the story on all of that. Now the time to pick the big games of the weekend, including Georgia. Fresh off a win on the road last week against Mississippi State, one that clinched the SEC East and punched a ticket for the Dogs to the SEC championship game coming up once again. They've got more business to take care of in conference play before you get there, though. The conference finale for the Dogs in frigid, cold Lexington, Kentucky on Saturday. Georgia traveling up to face the Wildcats as a 22.5-point favorite. Kentucky on the other side of this, about as low as it can get right now after having lost to Vanderbilt last Saturday, snapping a very long conference losing streak for the Commodores. And now Kentucky trying to figure out what is what, playing at home there, Kroger Field, Commonwealth Stadium, as a 22.5-point dog. So, Mike Griffith, we come to you to begin things here today. Georgia on the road, favored by more than 3 touchdowns. How do you feel about Georgia and Kentucky?
Yeah, my mind goes a lot of different places with this in terms of Kentucky, seeking out immediate redemption after an embarrassing loss like that. The first team to lose at home to Vanderbilt in the SEC since Chad Morris in 2018, the dancing head coach recruiter. Kentucky can try all they want. I mean, Georgia's playing really well right now. Stetson Bennett threw 2 interceptions and they still beat Mississippi State 45-19. I just think Georgia's dialed in. I'm going to take Georgia to cover in this game.
So Mike Griffith on the side of Georgia, minus 22.5. Jeff Sintel, how about for you?
Yeah, guys, I like Georgia in this one. I like the big point spread. What did Brandon say last week? Laying a lot of wood, stacking up the wood. I just think Georgia. Watch Georgia this year. They're not really winning the turnover margin. One thing that they're doing is they're getting a lot higher stop rate. I think the rate right now is 22%. Only 22% of third downs are being converted against Georgia this season. That's remarkable considering last year's team was only 35% stop rate with all those NFL players. I like to lay the points again here this week. I think Georgia, without even really winning the turnover margin or getting great play from some of the better play of the season from Stetson Bennett, they're able to win these games. Georgia really, I think, has found a sweet spot. I'm sure Brandon will give us details or later on about Georgia with a mid-20s favorite on the road. I just feel like Georgia handles business in a game like this. I think Kentucky doesn't really have the roster to keep up with Georgia, especially late here in November. Lay the points, give me the dogs.
So Jeff Sintel also on the side of UGA. Connor, you want to join the fray in on this? Both of our scribes going with the dogs here thus far.
Yeah, I do. I think Georgia only needs to score 23 points to win this game because I don't think this Kentucky team is going to score unless they get a short field, which could happen given the way this Georgia team has turned the ball over this season. But they threw for 109 yards against Vanderbilt last week, who's the worst passing defense in the league. And this is a Georgia rush defense that has given up more than 105 rushing yards in a game just once this year, and that was Oregon all the way back in week 1. I just don't see how this Kentucky team scores, and it actually has nothing to do with the loss to Vanderbilt last week. I just think this is a really bad matchup for them. And so while I don't necessarily feel great about this, I just don't see Kentucky scoring enough points for this to really worry me that much. So give me Georgia minus the 22.5 here.
Dog Nation Daily listeners and viewers, they also agree there as well. 97% on the side of Georgia, obviously feeling good about where Georgia is, and maybe conversely not feeling good about where Kentucky is in all of this. And as Jeff said, you know, when Georgia's been on the road, favored by this margin under Kirby Smart, things have gone really well. Georgia's actually 7-2 against the spread on the road when favored by 20 or more points in the Kirby Smart era. That is a remarkably high total. Obviously, one of the recent outliers on that was the Missouri game here this season, and that doesn't include a game like last Saturday when Georgia was a 17 or so point favorite against Mississippi State, but still won in convincing fashion. So Georgia facing big margins on the road has been about as close to a sure thing as you can possibly get. However, that hasn't always been the case when facing Kentucky. Georgia's actually failed to cover in its last 3 against the Wildcats. They are 3-3 all time for Kirby Smart against Kentucky when you talk about going up against Big Blue Nation here. So a little bit of conflicting data on that necessarily. And yet, having said all that and having obviously seen how well Georgia's playing, I still kind of find myself wanting to take a flyer on the underdog here for the simple fact that 22.5 is a lot of points and that the level of motivation for Georgia in a game like this is a little bit more difficult to define. I've been saying now for a while I don't think Kentucky's very good, and I still don't, but in a game that's cold, you worry about wind becoming a factor, and if wind becomes a factor, the under becomes an even greater factor. As Connor said, you've already got an incredibly low total in mind for this game. And all of a sudden now you're talking about a game in which winning by more than 3 touchdowns becomes more difficult. I said the same thing last week. I was wrong, but the fact is I kind of got the kind of game I expected. This was closer, at least for a moment, and yet Georgia, to its credit, pulled away. But nonetheless, I'm actually going back to this well again. I'm actually taking Kentucky here plus the 22.5. Everybody else, though, in the entire world on the side of Georgia. Dar, you want to go with the flow and take UGA?
Nah, Kentucky's going to cover this game. There's too many points in this game. Georgia validated their win against Tennessee on the road, Mississippi State. This is a little different here. I think Kirby's going to kind of not want to show anything from this point on. Georgia's clearly the better team. They're going to win this game. They're probably going to get a lead. They're probably going to rest some players. They're not going to show a whole lot. And Kentucky's probably going to get a backdoor cover on this number. I like Kentucky a lot with the points.
Yeah, backdoor could definitely be open there on that. Staying in the SEC for a moment, and another game that has at least a playoff contender involved. Tennessee going to South Carolina. Vols wearing the orange helmets on Saturday. South Carolina, though, reeling from a ugly performance against Florida last week that you may not have seen, but was, whoa, boy, really bad. So SEC play here. Last week, Tennessee hung 60 on Missouri. May have been a little extra motivation beyond just the playoff stuff on that based on some offseason comments for Eli Drinkwitz. But nonetheless, Tennessee riding high here on the heels of having lost to Georgia and looking to keep that momentum going. Big number here in this spot, though, 21.5, according to our friends at MyBookie. Mike Griffith, will come back to you. Vols favored by 21.5 on the road at South Carolina. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, under the lights, Tennessee messing with their helmet color, Shane Beamer and his motivational ways. I love all the intangibles. I just don't think South Carolina is very good. I'm going to take Tennessee and give those points.
So Mike on the side of Tennessee here. Jeff, how about for you?
You know, guys, I think this one's pretty simple. Who's got the better team? Who's got the better, harder matchup? Who's got more to play for? There's a lot of stuff right there. That all convinces me. Tennessee's going to put up another big number, style points victory here. Lay the points, give me the Vols.
So Jeff Sintel also on the side of the favorite there with Tennessee. Connor, back to you here. Numbers 21.5.
Yeah, I like Tennessee here. I think you're going to see something similar to you saw last week. This South Carolina offense right now is just not very good. And while they'll be able to move the ball against Tennessee with a little bit more, you know, with a little bit more ease than they did against Florida, that Florida defense wasn't very good a week ago, and they had nothing for them. So I like Tennessee to run the score up late, I guess get Joe Milton some reps, and Tennessee is going to cruise to another big victory as they have to keep showing the belief that they are one of the four best teams and dominate these lesser foes. And while some believe they control their own fate, I think with TCU, USC, two games we're going to pick later, it might not necessarily be the case if those two teams keep winning. So they're motivated to put up a big number, and I think you're going to see that on Saturday.
Dog Nation Daily listeners and viewers on the side of Tennessee here too, 86% taking the Vols. And I mentioned in my previous pick that while I got my Georgia-Mississippi State pick wrong last week, I sort of agreed with my process on that. Would probably actually make the same pick again had I had a chance to go back and do that. Completely different from me on Tennessee last week, though. I got way too cute in expecting Missouri to keep that within 20.5, something they were not capable of doing. For a while, it seemed like they might, but Tennessee found a way to really pour it on late. I'm not even talking about the final drive where you get above 60. You know, they put the foot on the gas at 28-24 and really showed something. And if you want a measuring stick for what Tennessee's been here this year, look no further than the point spread. Vols are 8-2 against the spread here thus far this season. The only games which they failed to cover, a home win against Florida, and obviously the game we all remember against Georgia. But other than that, even with increasing spreads here on a week-to-week basis, Tennessee's finding a way to match that. So Tennessee's clearly proven something here this year. There's no doubt about that. And the Missouri game last week may have been the latest data point with that in mind. And on the flip side of this, and I say this as a guy who genuinely likes Shane Beamer. I think that coaches like this are probably good for college football. I think that Beamer is a good coach. But what happened last week against Florida for South Carolina in a game that very few people had any reason to watch? What happened there was really, really bad. In addition to not being great defensively right now, South Carolina, as Connor, I believe, alluded to, had a hard time moving the ball against the Florida defense that's just wretched. And so if you want to think about the point spread being a factor here for a game like this, I think you have to count on South Carolina being able to do something offensively to keep a little pressure on Tennessee here. And I just don't think they're capable of doing it. South Carolina seems to be kind of falling on hard times at the end of this season, and this is a lot of points, but I think the only side to be on here is Tennessee minus the 21.5 here in this spot. So, Dari, once again, the flow heavy on the side of Tennessee. You want to go with the flow and take these Vols.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, who doesn't? I mean, they're playing for style points. They're trying to impress the playoff committee. They're trying to get a fourth spot in that committee. So I think they're going to light up that scoreboard.
Yeah, that's about as simple as it gets right there on this. This probably wouldn't be a bet for me, but in terms of a pick, it's sort of Tennessee or pass here in a situation like that. All right, that's the story in the SEC. There are other games of note in the SEC, but we want to pull out now and give you some of the big games with top 25 implications and certainly college football playoff implications and a preview of the big showdown next Saturday. We'll look at the Michigan Wolverines hosting the Illinois Fighting Illini. Now, at one point in time, Illinois seemed to have the Big Ten West title and a Big Ten title game berth squarely within its sights. However, the Illini have lost two straight over the course of the last couple of weeks, all of a sudden throwing the entire division into chaos. And yet on the other side of that, Michigan just keeps right along humming here. Both a real legitimate threat to make the college football playoff, seemingly whether it beats Ohio State next Saturday or not. Certainly with a win against the Buckeyes, that seems to almost be rubber stamped at that point in time. 10-0 under Jim Harbaugh here, and really for the most part doing it in pretty impressive fashion and getting a chance to add another resume booster by beating an Illinois team that's not ranked the top 25 but has been for most of this season. The number here from Ann Arbor, 17.5. Mike Griffith, what do you think about Michigan hosting Illinois?
I'm going to take Michigan and give the points to Illinois.
There you go. Jeff Sintel, how about you? The number is 17.5.
I think a congressman from Watkinsville, Oconee County, says it pretty bluntly. I don't think people are going to worry about Michigan showing too much for this game for Ohio State. Maybe that's all Michigan can show. I expect a closer game, but I think it's going to be around the 24-point type spread here. Lay the points. Give me the Wolverines.
So, once again, Jeff Sintel laying points there with Michigan. Connor Riley, now to you. The number is 17.5. And a couple of weeks ago, this was an Illini team playing pretty good football. Has that all changed now? What side are you on here?
I'm on Michigan here. I think with what you've seen from Illinois the past couple of weeks, losing to Michigan State, losing last week to Purdue, giving up 30 there, the defense had been their calling card. I think this game's going to play out similar to Georgia-Kentucky where, Michigan might not score more than 30 points, but I don't think they're going to need to score more than 24 to win this game and cover. So give me Michigan here, minus 17.5. That's more than enough points, especially at home.
Dog Nation Daily listeners and viewers kind of agree with this too. 91% on the side of Michigan here in this spot. Full disclosure, I have taken Illinois a lot with my best bet picks at the end of the show, and I've done pretty well with the Illini here this year. But somehow, some way, something has sort of seemed to change with them. They have not been the same team the last couple of weeks. I don't really know what it is. It's not injuries. They won a game with a backup quarterback a few weeks ago, so they've overcome injury at times this season. But in this particular spot, they just don't seem to be the same team anymore. So there's not much here to argue for Illinois. I don't feel great about the pick necessarily because 17.5 is still a decent number of points here for an Illinois team that's played more good than not here this season. But right now, you can't really recommend the Illini here. So I'll also take Michigan minus the 17.5. This may be a square play, but there's very little reason to argue for Illinois here at the moment. So, Dari, the flow decidedly on the side of the maize and blue. Is that where you want to go?
Get my takes a cold beverage here.
How about that? Dari Payro coming out with the beverage 2 weeks in a row.
Yeah, I have to cheer for Michigan here. Michigan's going to cover. They're great at home. This is just building not only for Michigan winning on the road against Ohio State next week, I'm calling it now, but it's going to set up for a major home opener for Michigan in 2023. They're going to go against the powerhouse East Carolina University Pirates going to Ann Arbor. So this just builds towards that opening day game. I love Michigan big here at home.
Now, you love to hear that, and obviously based on the non-conference schedule from this year, that is a pretty big step up in competition for Michigan for sure. But Dari showing a little support there for the alma mater there when it comes to East Carolina and Ann Arbor there next year. Another game with playoff implication. We'll look forward to picking that right now. Fun one in the Big 12 where TCU, fresh off a win last week as an underdog at Texas, finds themselves in a tough road environment this week there as well. On the banks of the Brazos River, as we like to say, in Waco, Texas, where the Baylor Bears, fresh off a blowout loss last week, find themselves as a skinny little 3-point underdog against undefeated and fourth-ranked TCU. The Big 12 has actually been, pound for pound, maybe the most fun league in the entire country here this year, and this is another example of that here on this particular Saturday. Can Max Dugan and the Horned Frogs keep it going? Is the magic still alive there in Fort Worth for TCU? Mike Griffith, the number is 3 points.
I expect a riveting game from the Frogs when they play Baylor.
I got that, and I will allow that, but for some people that may be a little too much. But Mike,
I can't bear to give you another pun right now. As much as I like Dave Aranda, I don't like Baylor in this spot. TCU impressed me. What they did to Texas, the way they did it, with that setting, that circumstance. I mean, that's a big-time football win for TCU, and I think they're going to get another one. In fact, I'll just say now, I think TCU is going to run the table and be in the college football playoff, and I expect them to be the team that Georgia plays in the semifinal in Atlanta. But we'll keep it where it's at right now and take TCU and give those 3 points to the Baylor Bears.
So Mike takes the 3 with TCU. Jeff, how about for you as the Horned Frogs get closer and closer to a Big 12 title game berth against what appears to be Kansas State, but a tricky road test here on the road at Baylor before you can get to that. How are you feeling about this number?
Yeah, I think I'll keep the puns in hibernation there. I'll let them play out. What I like here is, I think you said a term, Brandon, a skinny little number. I think that number could eat a couple more Philly cheesesteak sandwiches and still be healthy for this one. TCU, lots of good stuff for them. They got mojo. They got a whole lot riding on this game. I like the way that they are getting better in certain areas of their football team late in the season. Horned Frogs are going to win this game. Lay the number. Give me TCU.
All right, Connor Riley, can the Hypnotoad find the magic here once again? It's been one close win after the other. Can that continue?
You know, I tried to tell you guys last week what was going to happen. I told you the spreadsheets love Texas, and that game wasn't going to be won on spreadsheets. And at first, this game wasn't even going to be on our card this week. We were originally going to pick Ohio State beating up on some other Big Ten tomato can. And having ridden TCU all season long, and I agree with a lot of the points that my colleagues have made here, this line smells terrible. Something is up here. There is no reason this TCU team, who admittedly has played a lot of close games, should only be a 3-point favorite here at Baylor, especially given how much Baylor lost by last week against Kansas State. This is a rivalry game. This is an intense, passionate rivalry. And Mike brought up Dave Aranda's name here, and I think Dave Aranda's going to have something in the bag here. Texas defense wasn't great, or it hasn't been great this season, and they really slowed down that TCU offense last week. I think Baylor's going to find a way to do just enough to cover this game. I don't know if they're going to win outright, but give me Baylor here plus their 3 points going against my beloved Hypnotoads.
77% of Dog Nation daily listeners and viewers disagree with that. They're on the side of TCU. Maybe somewhat surprising the number's that high, but nonetheless, that is the case. And Connor used the word defense a moment ago, and here's what you have to acknowledge, that while the Horned Frog offense was somewhat kept in check last week against Texas, the truth is the best defensive showing of the year for a team that prior to that had been kind of winning their games in traditional old-school Big 12 fashion, pulling out a lot of offense there late to preserve what was a close and kind of chaotic type victory. That had sort of been TCU's story. So last week they kind of flipped that script and played a whole lot more defense than they had against a Texas team that's shown the ability to score some points against teams there at time. And the truth is, I've been wrong about TCU every which way here this season, continually over and over again, expecting them to fall flat, and to this point in time, they have not done it. So admittedly, I've been wrong, and admittedly, their resume right now is somewhat playoff worthy. But this is one of those scenarios where if I wasn't there for the wedding, I am not going to be there for the funeral. And in the case of TCU here, just out of spite, I am going to take Baylor plus the 3, because eventually, if I go against TCU enough, I believe I'll probably eventually be right. And so in this particular case, it's Baylor plus 3 here for me in this spot. Probably a rowdy environment in Waco, despite the fact that Baylor played an awful game last Saturday. The flow, though, on the side of TCU. Dar, you want to go with the flow and take the Horned Frogs?
Can't do it. I mean, everything points to TCU easily covering this number at Baylor. It's like Connor said. I mean, Vegas actually is telling you something here by setting that line. They're going to entice a lot of people to take it. I'm not surprised. The public money that's going to go on TCU is going to be through the roof this week. I think Baylor's going to cover this. I think Dave Aranda will have a game plan, especially as they got embarrassed at home last week. I don't see that happening again. I think they're going to keep this game pretty close. You're also going to get some of that as the game gets close, the urgency, the nervousness is going to start to creep in for ECU being undefeated. I think it's going to be a close game down to the finish.
Yeah, I mean, to sort of further Dari's point here, and we kind of alluded to this last week, had Baylor not been blown out last week, there's a very good chance they actually could have been a small point spread favorite here in this spot against undefeated TCU. So a lot to consider here in this battle in the Big 12. And speaking of great battles, we'll also head now to the Pac-12, another league that has playoff hopes, but now those hopes rest on the shoulders squarely of just one remaining team. After Oregon lost last week to Washington, all of a sudden the only playoff team still alive in the Pac-12 is USC. But my, oh my, are there certainly plenty of events seemingly transpiring to see if you can keep the Trojans involved in this college football playoff discussion. But the job before that requires winning across town in Los Angeles, Pasadena specifically here, against a UCLA team that lost last week to Arizona, possibly looking ahead to this game against USC, or possibly because UCLA is just not very good. Either way, they lost last week to the Wildcats, now getting a chance to host the Trojans. Attendance has been a story for UCLA this season, but this game is sold out, expecting more than 70,000 on hand in the Rose Bowl for this game there. And USC, which comes in ranked 7th in the college football playoff rankings here this week, with a win and a potential Pac-12 matchup against either Utah or Oregon, could certainly be setting the stage for a college football playoff appearance. So USC, small favorite, air quotes here, on the road at UCLA. Mike Griffith, what do you think about the Trojans and the Bruins?
Well, UCLA beat the team that beat the Trojans.
True.
They beat Utah 42-32. That was a home game. The Rose Bowl is going to be sold out. It's not always. There's obviously a lot of distractions in LA. There's going to be a lot of attention on this game. Georgia didn't go after many guys in the portal, though. And one of them that they did go after was USC quarterback Caleb Williams. And the reason why they went after him is because he's one of the top 2 or 3 quarterbacks in the nation. And in games like this, big plays, big players. Let me try that again. In games like this, big-time players make big-time plays. So give me USC to cover against the Bruins.
All right, so Mike on the side of USC there. Jeff Sintel, how about for you?
Yeah, this game is interesting. This is supposed to have been Caleb Williams' year already in Los Angeles. He was supposed to be a Heisman favorite. Pretty good numbers, 3,000 yards passing, 31 touchdowns. I believe only 2 picks. The one thing you haven't seen from Caleb Williams yet is a lot of I guess, firepower or explosives off the ground with his great running ability. Got true 4.5 speed. Probably had one of the better quarterback workouts when he was a recruit, when he came through Georgia, that maybe the staff has seen in some time. I think this is a game where Caleb Williams gets it done with his legs. I think Caleb Williams leads USC to a pretty big win here. That 1.5 points that the Bruins are getting here, I don't think that's scary at all. Give me USC here despite that number.
Connor Riley, how about for you? USC and UCLA.
USC's defense is awful, and I really want to pick UCLA here, but man, you can't lose to Arizona the week before and expect to have any real sort of confidence going into this. So, if they had found a way to win last week and not blow that game, I probably would be picking UCLA here, but give me USC to fight on, if only because I think if we want to see Tennessee miss the playoffs and all the fun that it would be of seeing Tennessee fans just lose their minds, I think USC needs to keep winning along with TCU. So give me USC to win here.
61% of Dog Nation daily listeners and viewers also on the side of USC, maybe slightly smaller than I would have expected to be there in that spot. And here's one of those situations, and Mike kind of touched on this, that if you look at the college football playoff top 25 in recent weeks, now the loss last week for UCLA kind of makes this a little bit more of an obvious point, but there's been a kind of a huge gap in terms of perception of where USC has been and where UCLA, their in-city rival, has been, despite the fact that from a resume standpoint, USC's done nothing to deserve any of that. Their best win is a close, low-scoring game against Oregon State, which was barely in the top 25 here this week, and as Mike pointed out, the loss is a team that UCLA beat. So oftentimes when you have a misperception between where the pollsters, or in this case the committee ranking teams, is and where the gambling community is, the rankers are never right, whether it be committee or pollsters or whatever else, that they're clearly inflating the one team at the expense of the other, and the gambling folks almost always get that right. Clearly the gambling folks see a much more narrow gap between USC and UCLA than the College Football Playoff Selection Committee does, but nonetheless, I'm actually going to back USC in this spot. I'm going to do so for a simple reason. Maybe this is overly simplistic, but as Connor was just saying, this USC team that if it keeps winning will make the college football playoff. And in his past, for everything you want to say about what Lincoln Riley failed to do once he got to the college football playoff, this is a coach that has shown a real ability to get to the college football playoff. Winner of 8 straight games to conclude the 2017 season prior to that year's playoff. 6 straight wins to make the college football playoff in 2018, and then 5 straight wins to make the college football playoff in 2019. Late in the season, when there was no margin for error, 3 consecutive years at Oklahoma. That's exactly what Lincoln Riley did, and I believe he can do the same thing against a pretty manageable schedule here down the stretch for USC. Once they get there, I think they're actually an easier matchup for most teams than TCU would be, but in terms of getting to the playoff, Riley's shown an ability to do that, so that's enough for me to take a minus 1.5 here traveling across town to do so. It puts the flow on the side of USC there as well, so Dar, you want to go with the flow and take USC.
Man, this is a tough one. I mean, this is, I can see it either way. Last week was pretty crazy. UCLA loses to Arizona, probably looking ahead to this game. USC had their own issues in that game. They lost their running back, Dye, who's probably the leader of that team. It's not Caleb Williams, it's him. That's a crushing blow. They will not be able to run the ball. They'll probably have to pass more. This will be the Caleb Williams show, which may help them because UCLA's secondary is just so bad. So that could be a somewhat of a net positive, but losing him is definitely going to hurt that Trojan offense. I when moments like this, I default to what I know best, and I know East Carolina football the best, and I'm going to go with my former East Carolina Pirate offense coordinator, Lincoln Riley, because he's going to have a game plan set for this. He's going to have stuff up his sleeve. He's going to have some plays that's going to get them some points, and I think he's just going to outcoach Chip Kelly in this game because he has more experience doing that. So I'll take the Trojans.
So there you go, Dari on the side of USC here. And it seems interesting that our panel would say easy win for Georgia against Kentucky, easy win for Michigan against Illinois, easy win for USC, at least in terms of the actual pick for USC against UCLA. And yet history would show on these late November Saturdays, somebody somewhere is not going to make it as easy as it's supposed to be. And so it'll be interesting to see if that indeed emerges somewhere on this calendar here for this particular weekend. So those are the 5 games that we count against our standings as far as go with the flow is involved. And coming up, we'll get a chance to expand the board and look at anything on the schedule of the upcoming weekend and make our best bets for the weekend, our board picks here. Before that, though, one more quick reminder that this is Go With The Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews here today. And, of course, R.S. Andrews is one you can turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. So we head towards the football season, or the football weekend. Obviously, you want to settle in and enjoy the games. And one of the things that could prevent that from happening is some sort of issue with your water heater. Well, go ahead and know that if your water heater goes out or something like that happens, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. You just need to find R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for a lot more on that. So rsandrews.com, they'll take care of you. Story after story, they have been delivering smiles, and they can deliver smiles for you. So find them online at rsandrews.com. All right. Expand the board now. Anything from the upcoming weekend slate, as many games as you want to pick. Mike Griffith, the floor is yours for your board picks here. And as our producer, Michael Carvell, says, 100% chance that Michael will make a pick involving the SCS team. Obviously, this weekend gives you a chance to that with cupcake rivalry, cupcake pre-rivalry weekend in the SEC. There are some games like that out there. But, Mike, for you, anything you want from the weekend?
Yeah, I got a couple games for you. Let's go up to the Big Ten. Dari knows East Carolina. I know Georgia football, and former Georgia assistant Mel Tucker and the Spartans are playing host to an Indiana team that has just gotten beaten so badly the last 3 weeks. 45-14 at home to Penn State, 56-14 at Ohio State. They lose, and now they go to East Lansing. The woodshed, as Mel Tucker likes to call it. I'm going to lay the 10.5 points. The Spartans are going to get a big win in the noon showdown. They love their afternoon football up there. It gives everybody time to drive home safely and still have a good time. Afternoon football is a great thing in college sports. And then the other game, I'm going to go to another former Georgia assistant, Sam Pittman, who I think could be an Ozark character. You go into his house and the milk and cookies are on the table and the fireplace is warm, and then you look in the backyard and you see an arm coming out of the ground. Somehow Sam Pittman turns his players into demons on Saturdays. One of the best coaches in college football is a 2.5-point underdog to lame, distracted Kiffin. I like Arkansas with KJ Jefferson coming back in this football game to not only cover the spread, but win outright. I'm at 86.38% on my best bets, Brandon. Those are my two best bets this weekend.
There you go.
And Connor, Connor can put an accentuate that, please, Mr. Riley.
So there you go for Mike Griffith. Might need to document that.
Nothing from Connor? Connor, you do that all the time for no reason.
You asking me for pride and true? Yes.
There you go. Connor gives you the classic yes, sir, there in honor of Mike's pick of Sam Pittman. So good stuff. Jeff, how about for you? The board picks, your best bets, anything from the upcoming weekend?
Wow, I think Connor's yes, sir, blew out the decibels in my speakers here. Man, folks, I came awfully close to picking in that lousy, stinking game this week. You saw with Florida and Vanderbilt, healthy line, I believe 14 points. If you look at Florida's season, every game they played in the Power Five this year, the first 6 games were all decided by 10 points or less until the last couple. I think the Napiers are kind of trying to figure something out. I think if that line was a lot more, maybe even 17 points, I would have taken Vanderbilt, kind of making a good end of the season stand there. Can't go there. Here's what I like. I like that Maryland, Ohio State line right there. That's a robust 27.5 points. I'm going to take those points. I think Maryland will make this actually a game. I don't know how healthy Ohio State is, and I don't even know how close to being healthy some of their prime assets they're going to risk this week against Maryland. Maryland's played some good football, notwithstanding that Penn State game inside the conference with some of the other big teams in the Big Ten. I'm going to take Maryland. I'm going to snack on all those 27.5 points. I don't think C.J. Stroud's Heisman Trophy resume gets any better this week. Give me the Terrapins and those 27.5.
So there you go. Jeff Sintel taking underdog for change with Maryland. I'm kidding. I love Jeff. But taking Maryland plus the 27.5. Connor, the board belongs to you now. Where you want to go?
Yeah, my underachiever parlay last week, we hit on Miami. Texas A&M let us down. If I had known Devin H.A. was going to be a late scratch, I probably would have changed that pick there. But I'm not just going to give you one best bet this week. I'm going to give you three.
Wow.
I like Jeff's thinking along the lines of Florida here. They've been really good these last couple of weeks. They've covered the spread in their last 3 games here. I think this team has found their identity, and they know what they do well. Vanderbilt, they won their game last week. Might be a little bit of a letdown here. I think this Florida team is getting better throughout the course of the season and is playing well under Billy Napier, so I like them to cover the number at 14.5. I like Oregon State. We're going to go out to the Pac-12 this week. This team is ranked. This team has played well this season. Only a 7.5-point road favorite against Arizona State. Obviously, 7.5, the number worries me a little bit. But I like this Oregon State team to take care of business and go into a big matchup next week with Oregon in the Civil War to really make a statement, as this program for the second year in a row has gotten better under Jonathan Smith. So I give you an SEC winner, a Pac-12 winner, and now I gotta hit an over/under here. While the 32.5 points in Iowa, Minnesota is certainly tasty, I just got to stay away from that. Iowa, they found some stuff these last couple of weeks, and they're not going to be my bet. So looking through the over-unders, there's one that sticks out like a sore thumb. I said earlier, I don't think Kentucky's going to score. The over-under in the Georgia-Kentucky game is 49.
Yeah.
Unless Georgia gets there on their own, I don't think they're going to. I do think, as Daria pointed out earlier, they might try and shorten this game and just try and get it out of there with a win, not show too much. So give me the under in Georgia-Kentucky at 49.
Very interesting picks there from all of our panel here thus far. And got to give a little credit where it's due. Last week, Dari and I went head-to-head on the Washington-Oregon game, and to Dari's credit, he was all over the Huskies, and the Huskies won outright as a 2-touchdown underdog, so credit to Dari for that. However, while I took the L on that, was an outright winner with 2 underdogs of my own. I gave out UCF last week. They won it on the field. I gave out UConn last week as a 2-touchdown underdog. They won it on the field there as well, and the Huskies in Jim Moore's first year are bowl eligible. So a 2-1 win last week for me last week under the best bets, although a head-to-head loser with my one pick there against Dari Payro. So credit to him for that. I got 3 picks for you here there as well. I'm going to give you a small favorite here. NC State, the most inexplicable ranking in the CFP top 25 for this past week, was a 3-loss NC State team staying in the top 25, and that's only going to be a problem for one more week, because going to a Louisville team right now that just lost to Clemson but actually is playing a little bit saltier here late in the year. They are a favorite against ranked NC State. Tells you all you need to know. Louisville minus 3.5. That's a play for me here in this spot. And I have been very big this year in the idea of interim coaches. For whatever reason, we're seeing a pretty consistent bump from interim coaches across the board. Charlotte, Nebraska, Wisconsin. Obviously, what's going on with Cadillac Williams at Auburn. Brent Key, even at Georgia Tech, had a little bit of a bounce there when he was first installed. But what we also see is the juice you get for that. The honeymoon doesn't really last. So the Hilltoppers of Western Kentucky go into, as they like to call it, the loveliest village on the plains on Saturday. Auburn feeling good about itself because it just beat a Texas A&M team that had lost 5 straight coming in, giving them their 6th consecutive loss. They're just a 5.5-point favorite against Western Kentucky on Saturday. I actually like the Hilltoppers in this spot. So I'll take Louisville minus 3.5, Western Kentucky plus 5.5, and I'm going to take a flyer in a game that Jeff also mentioned. Maryland was shut out last week against Penn State and only scored 10 in a loss to Wisconsin prior to that. But the Terrapins are 34th, though, in the ESPN offensive FPI. They've actually scored at least 27 points in every other Big Ten game this year prior to those most recent 2. So that's enough for me to take a flyer on the over of 64.5 for Maryland playing at home, trying to get something going here offensively. Don't have an opinion on the final score here. It's a huge point spread in favor of Ohio State. But I actually do like over 64.5 here in this spot. So over 64.5 on Ohio State, Maryland, Louisville minus 3.5, Western Kentucky plus 5.5 against Auburn. Those are my best bets for the weekend. And Dari Payro, the floor belongs to you.
Yeah, Western Kentucky's interesting because I think they're 8-2 against the spread this year. So that'll be interesting if they continue cashing checks on the year against that spread. My lock this week is we're going to go back. We're going to go back West Coast. Mike would say it may not all be fact up to be, but we're going to take the Ducks to bounce back at home against Utah and cover a 2.5 or 3. wherever that number is right now, they're going to cover that number at home with a nice bounce back game against Utah.
Nothing more fun than being against a team one week and winning there and then turning around and being on them the following week and have them take you to the pay window there on that. So best of luck to Dari Pero as he makes those picks, and best of luck to all of you as you make your picks for the weekend there too. And don't forget, our spread information comes from our friends at MyBookie. You can obviously find them online at MyBookie, and then use the promo code DogNation to get a big deposit bonus when you get signed up with our friends at MyBookie, but use the promo code DogNation for all of that. Enjoy the game. If you're going to Lexington, stay warm because it's going to be very, very cold, and hopefully your picks will stay hot there as well, and we'll see you back here again next week at the same time for Go with the Flow, presented by R.S. Andrews. It'll be rivalry weekend next weekend. We can't wait for that. Getting ready for Thanksgiving, obviously, there as well. And we'll look forward to talking to you